Hi, so welcome back to Potluck the podcast. I'm Danila.
I'm Briley.
I'm Vincent.
I'm Caitlin.
I'm Darcy.
I'm Delano.
I'm Kirby.
And we are basically part of the Potluck the podcast. There's a few people here or who are not here who are in the podcast that you will listen to as you hopefully listen to our podcast. But this is just a little intro video explaining why we wanted to do this. We've already filmed or recorded about 9 podcasts so far. So we just wanted to give a little explanation, give a little short intro at the beginning to see if you guys be interested in this podcast. So we have a few questions that we're going to be answering today. So our first question is, why does this podcast help you, and what does it mean to you?
So this podcast helps me because it gives me a community to talk about things in our life and our relationship with God and each other. It just means a community.
Good answer. For me, given that I'm a new Christian, it allows me to pretty much hear other opinions and formulate my own basis to what I believe and pretty much grow in my own faith, as well as see how everyone of the group and possibly the viewers grow in their faith as well.
That's cool.
For me, it's I feel like people don't usually have meaningful conversations about God. And that's what it is for me. It's like a conversation about God where you can share feelings and stuff and thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think discussing your beliefs with your friends is extremely important for your spiritual growth and also for the spiritual growth of your friends and just growth overall as a person. Also, just hearing different perspectives is really helpful.
Yeah. Personally, for me, this podcast does a good job at facilitating new thought for myself. It gets the cogs turning up in here, and it gives me new perspectives to look at myself and the world around me through. So, yeah.
I'll say for me, usually we have these conversations with all of us together, but all of us are different places, and I miss the homies. So I think this is the best time I'm able to talk with everyone and just go on riffs and rants about all the things we love to talk about, including God.
Oh, that's such a good answer. So for me, I kind of came up with an idea for the podcast because I felt like I needed to fill a hole in the podcast space. When I was listening to Christian podcasts, it was mainly just testimonials and stuff like that. And what a lot of people were saying, it's just this podcast is more of a conversational, just talking about whatever's on our mind, whatever we're thinking. So it's way more, to me, meaningful just to have casual conversations about God. So the next question, how do you want this podcast to be viewed by others? What are you thinking?
For me, I kind of want people to view it as a conversation, like you were saying, like it's almost their own friends they're talking to and they're thinking about things and having conversation with. So I think it'd be cool if people viewed us as their friends as well, and that they were just having a chat with us.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what I was wanting this to be viewed as kind of like a potluck where everyone brings their dish to the table. You bring your opinion, your idea, and then we all discuss it and come to a conclusion, a biblical conclusion at the end, where that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that ditto. I want it to be viewed as a conversation among friends and a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we're all just kind of echoing each other. But yeah, basically just look at us as just a group of friends, like any other group of friends, talking about deep things sometimes and stupid things other times. And we're giving you a peek into that conversation.
I think the podcast should be viewed as fairly casual. None of us here are theologists. None of us here are actually like super knowledgeable about this stuff. We're just having a casual conversation like most people will have. So
Theologists. That's a word.
I'm a piggyback off of Delano. Please do not take me seriously. Or us seriously as a whole,
Same.
unless we say take us seriously. A lot of us are thinking out loud. So please understand. Thoughts are gonna shift throughout. So please don't take us seriously.
We are all works in progress.
Yes. Yeah. And also, like, I guess I'm just gonna add on to what Kirby was just saying. Like, we've all been friends for like a long time. Like, we've all known each other for a long time. So it's very easy for us to have a conversation. So some things that we may say, like, we're just bantering and just joking with each other, but it's not serious at all. But I hope this podcast allows the opportunity for religious topics as everyday conversation versus like not a dinner table like topic. Like, I just hope that religious topics can be more casual and not just like, oh, we don't talk about that. Like, why can't we talk about God? Okay, so my last question, which is our third question, is why/how do you think it would be beneficial to others, like this podcast? Why do you think this podcast would be beneficial to others?
So, as you said before, like you felt like there was a hole missing in the podcast. Like you didn't find anything that felt like just friends having a conversation about things they believe in. And I think this podcast could do that for people. It could be it could be the friends that not that people don't have friends, but like the friends that people don't have, you know? Like if people don't have a community that they feel like they can talk about these things to, I think it's good as Christians for us to put ourselves out there and be friends to everybody.
Definitely. And kind of to piggyback off that, as you mentioned before, this is intended to be a conversation, and with conversation comes perspective. And a lot of times we learn a lot from different angles, and sometimes you think you know something, but you don't see a different side of it. And I think it's one of the reasons why people keep coming back to the Bible and reread it. But also I think it's healthy because it helps strengthen what you know, and I'm learning new things every day. And I'm sure if I knew everything and I came back and was part of this, I'd still be learning new things because perspective is big. And for me, it's mostly about perspective, getting a new insight.
I think like that a lot of times that this podcast could be for like people who might not want like the structure or like the not rigidity, but like the formalness of like a Bible study or a Sabbath school lesson, but they still want to have like a discourse about God. I think that's important.
Yeah. This podcast is like a behind the scenes almost. We're all probably, I mean, all of us use social media. Probably most people listening to this podcast use social media. So we're all kind of used to the whole like thing that people say, oh, social media is just the highlights and you can't compare yourself to the highlights or whatever. And I think the same can go for your spiritual walk too. Occasionally, I think you can see where you are in your life, knowing what you do inside your own head, and then you can compare that spiritual walk to somebody else's that you don't really see the behind the scenes of their spiritual walk. But when you really look at it, when you really dissect it, you realize that all of us are basically going on the same journey with slight variations. So it's always helpful to see the behind the scenes of somebody else. And also it can just be helpful to help you as you're figuring out the same kinds of things that we are along the way, perhaps.
I think it's a goal of mine, and it would be beneficial for people to consider this podcast as a podcast that talks about Christianity rather than a Christian podcast. You know, I don't want it to be exclusively for Christians, because that's not what this is about. This is about just talking about Christianity in general from all aspects. Like Vincent said, this is for perspective gaining and a broadening of horizons. So yeah.
I low-key want to piggyback off of Darcy. Look at me, I steal people's quotes. The idea of behind the scenes is also the fact of like, yeah, social media is the highlights, the pretty things. Hey, it gets ugly in here sometimes, guys, and we're actual people. So we criticize, we look at things that we don't really like, and we point it out. So I think it's the idea of like not being afraid to have different types of conversations and just being candid, because I feel a lot of people are really trying to be really polished in how they speak, but sometimes just go whatever's at the front of the brain and just shoot. Hopefully, don't say something offensive, but if you do, we can track it back. But yeah.
Yeah, hopefully we don't do anything like that. That would be bad. But I kind of wrote this one down because I don't know, I liked how it came in my head originally. But my answer to this question is I think that this podcast could be a good way for others to enjoy a healthy conversation of biblical wonder. Like the Bible is like such a amazing place. Like so many media platforms have been used, like built off of what is in the Bible. So I think just having an idea and just going with that idea and just talking about it and letting our minds just like kind of wander and think about like how the Bible is so cool. I think is a cool concept. So that's it for the intro. Hope you enjoyed, and I hope you listened to our podcast, Potluck the podcast. And so with that, I guess we say bye. Say bye, guys.
Ciao.
Bye.
Don't forget to bring something down to the potluck next time.
Love that.
Next time for more.
More.